Automated Podcast.
Welcome to Automated. I'm your host, Mark Verbenkov, and in this weekly podcast, we will be exploring the impact of emerging technology on jobs, society, as well as us, with business and technology leaders, researchers, and independent professionals across the world. So one of, if not the most well-known robotics company today, is Boston Dynamics, and they have recently introduced another robot called Stretch, which seems to be a little bit different from their previous robots. So I've referenced Boston Dynamics a number of times on the podcast before, but today I want to explore the company a little bit further and also explain why this new robot might actually be quite important. So Boston Dynamics has built its fame on its advanced research and a number of viral videos showing robots doing things that were previously thought impossible. So some of the first show a robot called Big Dog, and this was a robot that was being tested in different environments where it was being able to self-stabilize after being pushed or walking over a steep hill or even on icy surfaces. So I actually particularly like a video that shows the progress that the company achieved over a 10-year time frame. It started with a Petman robot, which seemed to be unsteadily walking on what seemed to be two shaky legs with a safety harness attached to it to prevent it from falling. And at the end of the video, it was showcasing the Atlas robot performing cartwheels, jumps, and even handstands some 10 years later. So for any tech enthusiast, videos like these were shared to showcase some of the growing capabilities of both AI and robotics. And for others, they were used as warnings of the coming robot apocalypse. So I think also these fears were augmented due to the fact that though Boston Dynamics was originally spun out of MIT, some of the early research contracts were from the US Navy and even DARPA. But I think that the media buzz of Boston Dynamics was really more attributed to its impressive robotics more than anything else. So from the Big Dog robot to Handle to Atlas to the now commercial robots Spot and Stretch, I really think that the impressive capabilities and applications have made more people aware of what robots today can be used for. So I want to spend a few minutes to actually look at what some of these robots are. So as I mentioned before, Big Dog was their first one, and this was eventually canceled by DARPA due to it actually being too loud when it was walking. However, it would have been able to carry about 150 kilograms in environments that were pretty much too rough for vehicles, more or less acting as an autonomous pack mule for US troops. It would be able to walk at about 6.4 kilometers per hour and go up hills of an incline at around 35 degrees. And as an experienced trekker myself, I think that this is actually something that's quite impressive, especially for a robot. So Petman, the bipedal unsteady robot that was mentioned before, was developed for the US Army to walk and function as closely to a human as possible in order to test and evaluate the next generation of hazmat suits. This actually fits into one of the overall kind of interesting uses for autonomous robots, and that is their ability to be used instead of humans in emergency situations, such as search and rescue for fire, nuclear, and other conditions. I talked about in a previous episode, there were robotic fish-like entities that were used for checking out the nuclear reactors at Fukushima after the meltdown that happened there. So Atlas, perhaps the most well-known robot of the company, is a 6-foot-tall, agile, anthropomorphic robot. So it has been shown to do acrobatic feats like jumping, handstands, even jumping from one platform to another in parkour-like movements. It has also been designed for a variety of search and rescue tasks, including driving vehicles, removing rubble, opening a door, and even connecting a hose. But I think the reactions to this robot have been much more interesting than the robot itself. So the New York Times actually claimed that during its debut, it was a striking example of how computers are beginning to grow legs and move around in the physical world, describing the robot as a giant, though shaky, step toward the long-anticipated age of human robots. So somebody called Gary Bradsky, who is a specialist in artificial intelligence, also declared that a new species, Robo sapiens, are emerging, which I thought was quite interesting to hear. So moving on, Spot, which is the company's smallest robot at only 25 kilograms, it is a 4-legged autonomous robo-dog. And it is actually the first commercial robot for sale with a $75,000 US dollar price tag. So it's actually already been used in a police bomb squad and also in examining a launch pad test site after a SpaceX rocket explosion. So as mentioned at the start, Stretch, however, has a very different application, and though not nearly as flashy, may actually be a more important technology overall. So Stretch is an actual combination of two main robotic technologies, a mobile base, or autonomous guided vehicle, AGV for short. You can kind of think of one of those Amazon Kiva bots that kind of zooms around their warehouses, picking up and moving boxes. And then there is the robot arm with the gripper at the end. There's also a kind of third technology built in place, which is a perception mast, as it's called. And this is to the side of the arm that acts as kind of the robot's eyes, which hosts the vision system enabling the autonomous movement. So as with other AGVs, the base has 4 wheels, can move in any direction, and I think most importantly here, can make very tight turns. And the base itself, just for reference, is about the size of a pallet, which kind of fits into the main goal. I also have pictures up on the show notes if you want a more vivid representation of what we're actually talking about here. So though only at a prototype phase, the main application for Stretch is really geared towards logistics. This is namely moving boxes in warehouses. So this is a really far cry from the flashy acrobatic feats of Atlas or military possibilities of Big Dog. And actually some have even begun questioning whether this move marks a kind of negative turn for Boston Dynamics becoming just a typical average robotics company like many others out there. So this critique is directly connected to the shift in ownership. So as I mentioned, though originally a spin-off from MIT, Boston Dynamics has actually shifted hands quite a few times. And in December of 2020, the Hyundai Motor Group acquired Boston Dynamics with an 80% stake in the company. So Boston Dynamics has, for the most part, been a robotics research lab. This is not to take away from the impressive work that has been done, which I think any of us have really seen by the viral videos that have been out, but shifting to a commercial organization with robotics applications and specifically profitable ones will more than likely be linked to kind of mundane tasks rather than flashy viral videos. It's really hard to remain committed to long-term scientific goals when you're owned by a commercial enterprise that counts profits by the quarter. So it might be that the days of robotic videos going viral from Boston Dynamics are actually over. But either way, let's get back to the important point here, and that is what actually makes Stretch important. So Hyundai is one of the leading companies in mobile robot research and development and has already made extensive research in creating autonomous robots and vehicles that can navigate various environments as well as terrains. So flexibility, I think, is really one of the most essential aspects of manufacturing and logistics with today's fast-paced and ever-changing consumer demand. And this is particularly true for smaller businesses which cannot get the advantages of the economies of scale that large corporate producers can get when a large, fully automated system is set up. And I think it's important to mention that this is usually a fixed setup. It's not one that is flexible and can be changed relatively quickly. A robot like Stretch, however, can allow a small business to set up a partially automated logistics system very quickly and with limited capital expenditure due to its kind of plug and play nature. And this could support businesses to grow faster and enable employees to shift their work tasks towards managing the robot rather than doing the mundane work of box moving compared to before. However, it is still unclear whether Stretch will have collaborative functionalities like some of the newer robot releases from companies of such ABB, for example, or whether it will require a guard system to stop workers from being hit if they get near the robot. which is what happens with many of these larger industrial robots that are used by many of the larger kind of car manufacturers or other producers out there. But I think that either way, Stretch might have a real benefit for logistics companies, and it will be interesting to see how it is adopted in 2022 when it is eventually ready. So finally, I think it also showcases that even though the leaders of robotic development can showcase what robots can do, this doesn't necessarily mean that this is what the robots will be used for in the real world. So it might actually be longer than expected before we see robots all around us, as depicted in sci-fi films and other media. And I think that this is especially the case if there is no profitable option for making these awe-inspiring robots. Though I can fully appreciate the business and financial decision of developing a kind of practical and useful robot that I think Stretch does a really good job of exemplifying, I do also think that something is lost if Boston Dynamics no longer continues to showcase state-of-the-art robotics for the world. Well, that's it for this week's episode. Thanks for listening. If you like what you hear and you want to support the podcast and the conversations here, the best way to do this is to go onto Apple Podcasts and leave a review, as it helps the algorithm to reach out to new listeners and brings the show to them. Also, feel free to check out the website, automatedpodcast.org, where you can find the show notes for each episode, written articles on the themes of the podcast, and a library of resources on the topic of emerging tech and automation. Also, if you want to reach out and leave any feedback or you have any questions about the podcast or any of the conversations, there are general contact links such as email, LinkedIn, Twitter, etc. for you there on the website. And finally, for those of you that want more than just an audio conversation, the video recordings are now going to be up on YouTube for the newer conversations, so feel free to check out the videos by searching for Automated Podcast on YouTube, where of course you can like and subscribe if you prefer to support the podcast that way.
The Automated Podcast.